picture here, right? And there's a lot of stuff going on. So I did simple I'm trying to imagine what the artist was doing when he was creating this. And there's kind of two techniques that come to mind when starting a painting. There's one where you do an underpainting. I think it's
Yeah.
called the prematura, right? Where you do an underpainting of just one color, usually like what is it, like burnt umber or something like that, and you draw it out, and then you let it dry, and then you add color on top. And then there's another version, it's called the alla prima, where you do it all in one shot. So I'm not really too sure what the approach was, but judging by the browning, like these brown halos around the branches, right? I'm almost thinking that there was some kind of underpainting, and then
Yeah.
he went over it again with maybe a finer brush, like just to get those brown halos. I'm not really sure how we went about doing that, but we're gonna do alla prima. We don't have time to do underpaintings and then add it on top. So my version is very similar, right? I actually wanted to start with kind of like an underdrawing, maybe with pencil. So I was going to just show you some of the things that I use when I'm sketching. So most people, when buy a pencil from the store, like a number two pencil, it's usually a 2B pencil, right? And that's kind of it's it's like a workhorse kind of brush, not brush, pencil, meaning it can do light lines if you press lightly, and you can do heavier lines when you press more firmly. But if you really want a really nice sketch pencil, right, I would recommend the H pencils. They're usually a set where you have, a couple of H pencils, like 4H, 2H, and H. And then you have the B side. So H is right in the middle. H and B, they're like side by side. H is a little bit harder and B is a little bit softer. And the higher the H value, the harder the pencil, the lighter the line. And the B pencils, the higher the B value, the softer the pencil, and the easier it is to get darker lines. So if you're doing an underpainting, it might be a good idea to use like a 2H or a B pencil. Here's another brand. This is a 4H. Um, so I started branching out more into the 2 millimeter lead pencils. So this is kind of like an engineer's pencil, right? Or like architect. They tend to use these a lot because you can sharpen them. It even I'm not suggesting that you buy this. I'm just showing you. It even comes with its own sharpener. You put it in here, you sharpen it, and you can sharpen this to a very fine point. But that's more for like technical drawing. As far as sketching, I like it sketching with this because the lead is very wide, right? It's a 2 millimeter, and it's pretty sturdy. It's pretty stout, and they come in really long lengths. I'm not sure if you can see it, but on the tip of the pencil, it's actually printed the value. It says 2H. So you can buy the leads in, all kinds of different hardnesses. You get H pencils, B pencils. I have 2H and 2B that I use for these. And it just saves me on wood and sharpening. So you can see I took a blade to this pencil, right? So that's more of like the old school or traditional way of sharpening a pencil with a blade. And it reveals more lead. So I usually hold the pencil towards the rear um, with a like an overhand grip. And I usually use the side to sketch. Rarely do I ever sketch with my hand like this, the traditional grip, only because it wears out my point very quickly, and it's a little bit um, it's like it applies a little too much pressure. I feel like with this, you can do very light passes um, and get quick results, kind of doing like this. Also, if by moving my fingers, I kind of teach you, I showed you this technique with the brush. Just by moving your fingers back and forth, you can make the pencil move fairly quickly. If I was to do that up here, right, you could use the lines as reference. If I do that up here, I got 2 boxes worth of travel. Now, if I do that back here, you guys can see how much travel there is, right? So this is could be a little bit more economical as far as energy and time. Whereas if you need fine detail, you want to move up more, closer to the tip for fine detail. But if we're doing sketching in general, might be, mid to, back of the pencil for sketching. Right, so that's just a little insight into that. As far as colors, we're going to use the primaries. Right, I believe, I'm hoping that you guys have some type of green. Do you guys have green paint? And if you do, is it similar to this or like a lighter green?
I tried to give everybody all the primaries black, green, and magenta.
Oh, magenta too. Okay, cool.
So everybody should have those colors. I don't know if it's that green, but it's supposed to be like a normal green.
Okay.
Yeah, the green's a little bit lighter than the one you're showing.
Okay, so it's like either like a grass green or like maybe a green oxide. Let me see. Is it something more like this?
Somewhere in between.
Let me see. It looks a little lighter because of the plastic.
Like leaf green. It's definitely darker than that.
Okay. All right. So then I'll go with this one. Ready? So something else I wanted to share with you guys is the palette that I use. Right. So I'm painting on my own. I was just using just a regular palette. There's nothing special about it. It's actually just a thin piece of wood. Right. And what I do is I tape palette paper to it. So if you're used to painting on these, I mean, this is a very economical way to go. And this is usually my go-to because it's cheap and I can throw it away. But what the palette paper is also a very economical choice. It usually comes in a pad. So let me switch my other camera. Right. So it has a hole. Right. It comes in a pretty thick pack. Let's see how many sheets. There's 50 sheets. Right. You could actually hold the whole pad as a palette. You can use it like this. Right. Put all your paints in here. When you're done, you tear it off and you have a new palette ready to go. But I like to tear these off and I'll put it on my board. It's just a little bit sturdier. This has some flex to it. So if you're investing in some things, right, for painting, that might be something that you might want to try out. But as far as in-person painting, it was just a little bit more economical to go with the plates. And a pack of 100 plates isn't that much, right? So and if you needed more space, I would just give you another plate and you can continue mixing on that. And the fact that they're white gives you a nice contrast of color just to see what you're working with. There are palette papers that come in gray, like a 50% gray. And that also gives you a good sense of values, right? Values are lights and darks. So using the gray, you'll see the white being very, very bright and the black being very dark. And then you can match your mixtures according to the white and black and then the gray of the paper, right? So if you're gauging lights and darks, so on these trees, right, the brightest highlight would be on this branch. This is the foremost branch, the closest one to the viewer. So I put my brightest whites here. This would be the second brightest mark. So I added just a little bit of other pigments to slightly darken it. So maybe if I move it a little bit closer, that's a little hard to see with the glare. But this is definitely knocked down a shade than this, right? And then you can see here, this is the reflected light. So we have our direct light source coming from the right, which is why we have the brightest highlights on the right of the tree. And then reflected light, right? So in the world, light is always bouncing off things. And the reflected light comes from the other direction. And it's usually much more subtle. And the tone or the temperature of the color is different. So if you usually have a cool main light source, your reflected light is usually a warmer color, okay? And here in the middle, this is kind of like I would liken that to like a sandwich of light. You have direct light, indirect light, and then you have a surface here that's not receiving light at all. From your viewpoint, the light that's sandwiching in those things, there's nothing bouncing off this plane, so it appears darker to you. We call that the core shadow, right? So main light source, reflected light source, and then we have our core shadow. Okay, so that's why we have these three colors here. And definitely going to walk you through that. So I guess focal point, let's talk about focal point, is the birds, right? The branches are part of that that plane, right? Right. So like plane meaning plane, right? So that viewing plane, they're all together on the same plane. Things that are in the background are going to appear more muted, right? The lines here, it's kind of getting equated in the camera, but these lines are just a little less pigmented than the lines on the branch. And the way I separated those is I added just a little bit of black to the mixture that I made for the lines in front. And in the lines in the back, I did that with pure pigments alone. We maybe even to add a little bit of white just to grade out. And that's called atmospheric perspective. So the birds are pretty much the same size, right? All cardinals are roughly the same size. But this one appears smaller in the background, right? So that's perspective. Things further away look smaller. Atmospheric perspective is when things are further away, they lose clarity, they lose intensity, right? And they become more, I guess, more of the bluish side. So if you've ever seen pictures of like the Adirondack mountains, what they call them, like the Blue Ridge Mountains, that blue that you see there is all the atmospheric interference. There's a lot of moisture in the air, and it makes everything appear blue. Whereas if you were up close and you were seeing shadows, they would appear more black, right? So we're going to try to force that perspective, with this two-dimensional canvas, and things that are further away, we're going to make them grayer, or just less intense than the things in front. And then everything in front and the front plane, the things that are in the foremost part of the painting, will be much more pungent, bright, and sharp. Okay. And so if you guys don't have a pencil, I would say grab a pencil, because I think it'll come in handy, because sketching and painting can get away from you if you don't have a good grasp on drawing and where you're going. If you don't have the source in front of you, it's always a good idea to start with a pencil rather than kind of going through it with a paintbrush. This is a lot easier to change. So I'm going to give you, if you guys need a minute to go grab a pencil, go do that, and then we'll start sketching.
Hi, Sam. Sorry, I have a question.
Sure.
Is it possible to kind of lighten a little bit the outline so it's not so heavy? Or that's part of the...
Sure. I mean, you're the boss of your painting. If you choose to do something different, by all means, go about however you want to do it. So yeah, if the weight of the lines. So I was kind of, I guess, focusing on. Let's go back to the source. So the lines are a bit more subtle in the original painting. I tend to be a little heavy-handed at times with outlining. So you can see the lines in the branch in the foreground are a bit thicker and stronger in pigment than the lines in the back, right? So that'll give you a sense of greater depth. So yeah, by all means, if you want to make your lines thinner and you're capable, go for it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. The brushes, I forgot to go over the brushes. So the brushes that I have, I believe you guys have 3 brushes, yes? I have the wide brush.
We have a whole set of brushes, so different sizes.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
So did everybody get that kind of that pack of brushes, the assorted brushes? I did everything on this painting with these 3 brushes. However, if you need another brush that you feel like would do the job better, by all means, feel free to grab it and to use it however you deem necessary, right? So a lot of this is just, I try to simplify as much as possible. If you want to experiment and do something, different, go for it. And I'm just here to be your guide and not a drill instructor, right? All right, so I'm going to hold off on pouring my paintings. I'm going to just focus on the sketching. So is everybody ready to sketch?
Sure.
All right. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. Remember the focal point, this is where the birds are going to go. And the branch kind of bisects it right here, right? So it starts in the lower third, right? If we break the painting into thirds, the branch begins in the lower third and it enters the center third. So it comes down here and it just branches upward up here. So branches go from thick to thin, right? As when you start closer to the trunk, and then as you leave the trunk, it should get smaller. So let's try that. So we're going to be doing like kind of multiple passes here. We're not going to try to draw the whole branch all in one shot. So here, I have two lines showing my branch. Now remember, the birds are sitting on the branch, and they're the main focal point. So if you go too high with the branch, your birds are going to be way up here, right? So as you leave the lower third of the painting, right, here's the lower third, and your branch enters the middle section, you want the branch kind of going off onto the lower part of that midsection. All right, and a lot of these branches are, let's go back to this one. So I'm just going to share this again. So the branches, if you could see, there's a pattern. There's like the letter Y. Just keep thinking the letter Y. So we just drew this main branch here, right? And there's a split here, right? So we see that Y shape, right? Main branch and then the Y shape. Then all the other branches that come off that also create a Y. So this is a Y here, right? This arm here branches off into a Y. And then off of this leg of the original Y, there's another Y, right? So just keep thinking of the letter Y. I'm looking at this branch to the left of the cardinal in the center. So we have our main Y, right? So you guys could see this Y shape here. Now, if I go to the left arm here, there's a branch here, and that creates the letter Y. And then I go to that I go to that arm of the letter Y, and then we see another one. Same thing over here. I'm going over here, there's another Y. So it's just a pattern that we see. So on this arm, letter Y, and then on this arm, the letter Y. So we're just going to keep repeating that until we get just a nice rounded out kind of branch. All right. So our first Y, let's do the one on the left. So I'm going to curve this one up here. So this would be the bottom part of the branch. Now I'm going to do the top part. Now I start. Yes.
Is it possible to put the original on the right near where your paints are, just so we can reference it while we're drawing?
I think if I share my screen, yeah, we can see the reference material, but then my screen gets shrunken down. Can you see that?
Yeah.
So there's no way I can share the full screen over here and the picture on this side. It's
Can you, sorry, Sam. We can, some computers can preview both, but can you put the picture in the chat and we'll pull it up and figure it out on our own how to.
Is there file sharing in the chat? Oh yeah, there is. Oh, but it's off of Google Drive.
You send it to me. I can email it to everybody in the class right now.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Ruthie.
All right, so guys, give me 1 second to do that. right, Sharissa, the picture is shared.
Thank you. I think that'll make it a lot easier because
Yeah. Okay.
I was finding I was putting the lines, you know, without the visual, I was not getting the right orientation.
Trying to explain thirds and not having the visual references is a little tough.
Thank you.
All right, so also when I'm looking at shapes, when I'm looking at drawing positive shapes, right? Positive shapes are the objects that actually appear. So the positive shape here would be this branch. I'm also looking at the negative space that's created with the shape. So you guys can see this shape here created, right? So think of the air next to the branch without this branch, without this tree here. Kind of looks like half a heart. Everybody see that negative space there? You can use the size of the negative space in the shape to help kind of check your work, whether or not you drew an accurate line, okay? So also like the negative shape below this, so below this main branch, if you look at this huge swath here, this section, you're trying to blank out in your mind any of the information here, and you just look at the outline, that makes a shape, right? You could use that to double check your work.
Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt, Sam. Can you do us all a favor when you're when you're done, or just me, actually, I don't want to speak for everybody. Can you put your hand up to that negative space that you're discussing right now, just to get a perspective?
A reference?
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure.
I'm sorry, everybody.
No, it's fine. So here's the caveat here. So the painting that I did is on a 12 by 16, where you guys, I believe, are painting on 11 by 14.
That's right.
Yeah. So the proportions will be a little bit different. So although my hand appears this large in the painting, it wouldn't be that large here. And also my hand is different from your hand, right? So my hand might be a little bit larger than yours. So that also might throw it off. So what I would try to focus on is looking for, like if you were to split this canvas into thirds, right? Going thirds vertically and then thirds horizontally, you can use that simple grid to kind of like guesstimate where things go. So using different units of measurement might confuse where we're going, right? So also what we want to mostly keep in mind is that the birds are central to these branches. So if it appears that if we put in our birds, right, these fat little cardinals, and I put them here, and then I look at the location that they're at, but I don't like it, the branches might have to change location, right? So it's always a good idea to look at the source. So you guys have the source now, and then guesstimate, simple dimensions like thirds, right? So in photography, they actually call it like the rule of thirds. Sometimes on your phone, you'll see a grid, right, that appears when you're going to take a photo where you see 9 boxes. That's basically the rule of thirds kind of, baked into your camera. So it's good for composition, right? So I think using that as like a coordinate grid can help. So I think I was working on that branch. So I'm trying to create the legs of the Y. So I got one arm. Let me stick with the right term. Arms of the Y. One arm, and I'm just going to keep adding arms. I'm not going to try to erase and make it appear like a finished drawing. Right. So the second arm of this main Y, right? So we're going from largest to smallest. So the main Y here branches up and into the middle third. Right? So I have my Y. Now I'm going to break this arm into the letter Y. And I'm always working thick to thin. And then this arm also branches into a Y. All right, and that's just the pattern. So I have Y off of this one. And And another Y over here. And when we look at the source, there's kind of like a frame around the birds, right? So if you look at the frame around the birds, it's almost kind of like another heart shape. We have this branch wrapping around to the left, and we have this branch kind of wrapping around to the right. Now, it doesn't have to be, you know, spot on to this. This is just a source. It's just inspiration. But we do want to keep that kind of like framing there for our two cardinals, so that when we go back to the drawing, we want our other branch here. So I'm going back to this bottom arm, and I'm going to create that Y, right? The arm of that Y-shaped branch, framing the other side of my cardinal. Right? Don't worry about these lines here. Right? We don't have to physically join the branches with the pencil. We're going to do that with the paint. Right? So I'm going to branch this Y off that way. That one kind of goes off frame. Then this arm here has a Y there. And if you want, you can, on this arm here, you can branch off with another smaller arm. And we don't have to draw every single limb and branch here. What we do want is to get the main ones, right? We can always add more with the paint. I mean, this isn't set in stone, right? This is always up for change. Underneath this main branch here, there's another arm that comes down here. And the main shape I'm seeing kind of looks like this, right? Kind of like a backwards C. And I'm going to close that branch. Now, if this is the main branch here, all other branches should be subordinate to this main branch. This is the thickest branch. This is the main papa here, right? All the other branches are smaller than this branch. I'm going to do another, I'll do the other arm here. And so now I have my Y going downwards. I'm going to look at this arm. I'm going to split this one here. There's another branch there. This arm here, I'll split it in the opposite direction. All right, that looks good. So now that I look at my size that I referenced for my first cardinal, it's way too big. If I look at all the spacing, right, I've created this nice little pocket for my cardinals to exist. They're the central focus, right? That main branch here kind of leads us into this picture here, right? Got a nice, beautiful little diagonal going. Okay. I also have some background elements. So if we look at the, actually, no, let's do the cardinals first. So let's look at the orientation of the cardinals. So we have one cardinal who's facing us, right? And one cardinal that's facing to the left. The cool thing about this is that they have a very similar shape, right? So it's just a kind of like a fat oval with a point. Same thing here, fat oval with a point. The only thing that changes is the orientation of the face and the tail, right? So the tail hangs down to the left, and here the tail goes up and to the right along, following this branch over here. So we can use simple shapes, our ovals. We're going to draw an oval, and then at the end, I'm just going to add a peak to that oval. Same thing here. I'm going to draw a large oval right on the branch, add a peak, and then I'm going to add the face afterwards. If you want to break down the face, you can see how the artist kind of took artistic license and changed it to a heart, right? Kind of looks very heart-like. Whereas cardinals, they tend to have, there's like a rectangular, more of a rectangular shape here of the black feathers that they have. I'm not sure if I saved it to this folder. Let me see. Yeah, I didn't save it to this folder, but I do have tons and tons of pictures of cardinals. I love cardinals. And the black feathers do kind of protrude underneath the beak. But I think it just looks cuter with with the way the artist changed it. All right, so let's add some ovals. So now I'm trying to keep in mind. Let me stop sharing the screen. I'm trying to keep in mind that there is a little bit of room in between the cardinals. So the one cardinal could be here, and the other cardinal kind of off to the side. Now they're the same shape, or the same size, right? The birds themselves. So here is my peak for the feathers on top. And here is the peak. Now on the picture, the back of the bird appears kind of straight over here, whereas the front kind of curves that way. And I kind of want to give some weight to that. So imagine you're holding a water balloon, right? So the water balloon isn't perfectly round. The weight of the water kind of stretches it downwards, and then it gets like fatter towards the bottom. So here my circle is, I meant to draw an oval, but what I did is something more circular. So I'm going to change the shape, and I'm going to kind of like weight the bird down. I'm going to make it a little bit plumper at the bottom. All right. So I can take an eraser. I can get rid of some of these lines. There we go. His tail. Well, how are we doing so far? Did everybody get their branches done and then have their two cardinals put in place? If not, I can give you a couple of minutes just so everybody's on the same page. How are we doing?
Good pace.
Good pace? Good. Okay. So the tail is kind of obscured by this branch here, and it's just really just a straight line going off to the side. Okay. For this bird, the tail is kind of hidden behind this branch where it originates. And what you can do is have just a small rectangle like so. All right, and a good way to start the face is going to live right here, right? We don't want it too low. We don't want it in the middle of the body, right? So if this is the center of the shape, we're just going to start just slightly above that, and you can fill in a heart shape. Okay, and now the beak would be kind of like a simple diamond, right? Like a rounded diamond. So we don't want to do sharp, jagged lines. So think of like a fluffy kind of diamond, right? So like what do you call those? Like a plush. Like so if you ever seen, sewn together plush toys, like if it's a box, something like that, everything is like kind of rounded. The edges are rounded, the planes are rounded, but it's, it's the shape of a box. So think of that when drawing your diamonds, kind of like a plush, soft, squishy diamond. Let's go over here to the face on the side. So now this will be a little bit different because now we're drawing off to the side. So I'm going to use the back of this plate. So a heart that's straight on looks like that. But now we're turning that heart and we're turning it in space, right? So one side would be skinny and one side would be wide, right? So this would be a straight on view. I'm looking directly at it. And this is if I have a heart and I'm turning it slightly to the left, right? So If you want to break that down into simpler shapes, if that's a little hard, you could do a skinny oval, like so. And then you can do a larger oval, kind of leaning to the right. And then you can kind of do the outline like so. Okay, so that's just to show us that the Cardinal's face is turning. I'm going to put my heart one big side here, and the other side kind of disappearing off behind it. And now my plush diamond also changes in shape. So I'm going to do kind of like one long triangle like this, right? So this this leg of the, or this side of the triangle is the longest. Here you have the shortest, and here, well, actually this would be the longest one. The mouth line would be the longest one, second longest, and then the shortest here. And then you would close that up on the bottom with another triangle. Let's try to make this bottom one smaller. Okay. So starting from the top, I'm going to draw a triangle, and then another triangle underneath. All right. I mean, you could put circles for the, or ovals for the eyes, but honestly, that's probably going to get lost in paint. Right. But if you want just to add it to your visual library, right, to your mind's eye, when you're ready to paint it, you know where you want those eyes to go. Even if they get covered with paint, you kind of have a mental image of the outline that we're creating here. And for the mouth, I would do a curved line connecting corner to corner. All right. So from the edges, right, the corners of our plus triangle, I just did a little curve for the mouth. And for this one, it's a little bit straighter because we're seeing it from the side. You do not have to draw the eye for the other side, right, because it's being obscured by the beak. Right, that'll help us with some perspective. So let's add some background things going on. So now the picture is pretty much framed. I'm going to share the source picture real quick. So if we look at the left and right edges of the painting, you'll see two trees, right? These are, I believe they're beech trees, B-E-E-C-H, right? Beech trees. They have this kind of like paper quality where the wood splits and the wood curls. And you get these really nice, you know, charismatic marks on the trunk. Well, here is one, it's pretty much vertical. And here we have another line that's vertical. Those are the two trees, and they kind of go off camera. They go off screen here. Then you have this third one that's right behind this cardinal here. I want to focus on framing it first, right? And then we'll focus on this third tree here. So first, we're going to put a line framing our, let me stop sharing. Don't make them too wide, right? We don't need them to be, you know, super wide. Try to make them thin, maybe an inch or two wide, right? So if you use your thumb as measurement, that's your thumb digit may be about an inch or close to an inch. So your full thumb length would be about 2 inches. So that might be a good way to measure that. And I'm just going to draw a straight line going down. Okay. And then I'm going to go to the other side. Same thing. Okay, so again, that's about the width of my thumb, about 2 inches. Now, once you put those in, I think the artist chose to put another tree in just because there's this huge negative space behind the tree. I mean, behind the Cardinals, and there's just not enough visual interest there. So I think that's why he added a third tree. And he also didn't center it, which would kind of be like very rhythmic. It'd be like, you know, it would be too boring, right? So not only did he add a third element there, but he also, you know, he also leaned it to one side. So we're going to do the same. We're going to add another tree that's closer to the one on this side. We're going to draw a line going down. And maybe we'll draw it a little bit smaller than these other trees. So we'll probably stick to maybe a thumb and a half, right? An inch and a half. And it should pass right behind your cardinal to some degree. So it gives it a little bit of contrast back there. Now there is another branch here that, and a bird that kind of fills in this space that I added. If we have time, we might be able to add the bird. We can always add the branch with paint. We don't have to, you know, we really don't have to draw it in. We've already designated the space down here. So if we want to draw it in later on with the paint, that's cool. But we have the main elements with our pencil, and we can start painting. All right, so I'm going to pour my paints out. I didn't want to pour them out too quick. So if you guys have to set up your paints, you can do that now. I'll show you how I lay out my paints. So I usually keep white and yellow next to each other. I just usually go in order of strength or intensity. So white first, red, yellow and red. I'm pouring out way too much paint. I could probably paint 5 paintings with the amount of red I just put there, but right, because we're only using red for the Cardinals. So I guess that's a lesson. Keep in mind what you're using the paints for. If I needed more paint, I could have always added. Right, so I definitely squeezed out a little too much.
You can use red to make brown. Is that right?
That is true.
Okay,
Yep.
cool.
Yep, yellow, red, and just a little bit of blue. Right. So anytime you mix whenever you're working with the primaries, there's always going to be some mixture of those, unless you're using like pure orange or pure purple, pure green, right? But once you start doing different intensities of those colors, right, it won't just be red and yellow to make an orange. If I wanted to make a brown, which is like a cousin of orange, you would add a little bit of blue. So you're always dabbling back and forth with these two. So the artist chose to go with more of like a minty kind of green. So I'm going to add quite a bit of green. That color, it looks very dark on my camera. I'm going to try to increase the exposure here. So we can kind of see, yeah. Yep, okay. And last but not least, I'm just going to use a little bit of black. You can even hold off with the black because black will probably be used for outlining, and then, you know, that branch that I was telling you about before. So it's kind of hard to tell the difference between blue, green, and black. But next to the red, I have my blue. Next to the blue, I have my green. And next to the green, I have my black. All right. So, I wonder if I can use my... Okay. So as far as preparation goes, is everyone ready to start painting?
Almost.
Yeah, if we're still getting paints ready, that's fine. We'll take another 2 or 3 minutes. If you guys have any coffee, you got to heat up again if you're waiting. Let's see, it's 1:47. Okay, so 2 hours to paint. That's pretty good. So the first thing we're going to work on is it's almost going to be like a stained glass kind of window. The first thing that I want to work on are the backgrounds. So any point where we see sky, I'm going to start filling in those points with the colors that we're going to mix, right? And like I said, it's kind of like a minty green. But if you can see there, I'm mixing yellows in. There's a little bit of, grays. There's a lot of color play in there. You have a lot of opportunity to have fun. This is like a painter's kind of painting. Like if you're interested in mark making and mixing and making interesting relationships on the painting, this is going to be fun, right? Because there's really no right or wrong to how you do that sky. All right, your painting will not look like mine. Yours is going to be based on how you move your hand, how you've mixed your colors, and what kind of is more suitable to your eye, like what's more pleasing to your eye. So I definitely want to, like I said, I'm a guide. I'm going to show you how to mix certain colors, but I want you to have fun and, just kind of play and experiment a little bit. All right. So like basically what I'm trying to say, trying to copy me stroke for stroke is impossible. It's kind of just like a guided tour. So how did everybody do with their drawing? Any questions or concerns?
Could you show your palette once again, please?
Sure. So I keep all the warm colors together and I keep all the cool colors or dark colors together. So you can almost see a straight line, lights versus darks. Yours can be a little bit different. Like if you have the blue and green switch, there's no like set in stone thing going on here, but I just like to keep the darker tones over here and the lighter ones over here. The primaries I like to keep like this. I like to keep the yellow away from the darker ones because their intensity just wants to gobble up the yellow. The yellow is very translucent. I was trying to think of an analogy of how yellow performs, right, as a color. If you were to think of the raw material that you use to make yellow and something like blue, right? So imagine if you had a yellow stained piece of glass, right? You can see it's yellow and you can see through it, right? Imagine if you ground that up into dust. It would still kind of have those qualities if you mixed it with this liquid, right? If you took the blue, say you got blue from an opaque blue rock and you ground it up into powder and you put it into this liquid, it would still kind of hold those properties. So the pigments that are used to make yellow are somewhat translucent. And the pigments that are used to make, blue or black, or even white has an opaqueness to it, right? They're opaque. There's no translucency to the raw material. So those properties kind of carry over when you put them in liquid. So knowing those properties can help you kind of apply the paint to the canvas. So if you know you want something that's opaque and yellow, if you use yellow alone, it's not going to cover it up, right? You would have to add white to yellow. But what does white do to colors? It kind of raises their tonal value, right? It becomes lighter. So that means you would have to kind of paint it 2 times. You can mix yellow and white as a placeholder, right? You're using an opaque yellow. But if you need to intensify the yellow on the painting, you would have to go over it again with maybe at least one more coat of yellow. So now you kind of have the yellow glass over kind of a light yellow base, right? So that's how layers and glazing come into play. We'll go ahead and explore that a little bit more with the birds, right? To give them a little bit of 3-dimensionality. Because if you wanted to show 3 dimensions to the bird, right? So I'm trying to get a good view here. So on my painting, this area here is a little bit lighter than under here. I'm trying to give it some kind of roundness. It's not coming up so well on the camera. Maybe the source material, let's see. Okay, yeah, that shows a little bit, that shows a lot better. So that three-dimensionality, you have this orangey reddish kind of tone, and then you have this deeper, more maroon red. So if you were just to take red and add white, you would get pink, right? So that would give you a less intense red up here, right? And then you come down here and you have just plain red, or maybe you darken the red with just a little hint of blue, right? Adding a little hint of blue will give you a more, a deeper red, especially underneath the tail. Right, so you would have pink over here and then this kind of maroon color over here. Well, you can add another color on top, orange, right? Because red and yellow have translucency to it. And you would glaze that pink kind of color with that translucent orangey color. And it would change the nature of the color directly on the canvas, right? So that's how glazing works. You're actually putting translucent layers of color on other opaque layers to change the, I guess, the end result, right? When light hits it, it's going through that top glazed color. And when it's bouncing back into your eye, it's mixing optically. It's not mixing physically. Like we're not taking the paint on our canvas and we're not mixing that orange to make that opaque orange. We're kind of using translucency and the pigments together to create a more rounded figure. All right, and the only way that you really know how paints are going to behave is by using them, and actually just mileage, using the paints, getting to know what the materials are made of, right? Not all materials are made the same. So if you're buying student grade paint versus professional paint, they're going to perform a little bit different, or a lot differently, and it's mostly due to the intensity of pigment, right? How much pigment is in that binder, because all the pigments are the same. The pigments used in watercolor, the pigments used in acrylic and oil paints, they're the exact same ingredients. It's the thing that binds them. In watercolor, it's usually gum arabic. In acrylic, it's an acrylic polymer, right? Dries to a plastic. And then for oils, it's that thick oil base that air dries, right? It's the same powders, three different binders. And the difference between, low grade paint and high grade paint is how much pigment they're putting in. It costs more to add more pigment, which is then the cost reflects the grade of the paint. Professional stuff is more expensive. It costs more materials to make it. And cheaper stuff, they're just adding more filler and less pigment. All right. So let's start mixing our first colors. Let's see. So for our background, I will be work on getting good lighting, better lighting. So for the most part, we're going to be using a lot of white. So be prepared to replace your white, or at least try to keep it somewhat clean, right? So I'm going to be pulling from certain edges. So our paint puddles, right? I like to call them my paint puddles. I'm always grabbing my paint from the edge. And I don't like to wash my brush so much, right? Just waste time and pigment. So anytime I have a pigment on my brush, if I pick up red, I'm going to come here to this edge, and this will now be the edge that I come to when I have red on my brush. Same thing for yellow. Designate a different spot on your pigments, right, to constantly go to, so you keep the reservoir of paint nice and clean. And it's kind of an economical way of painting. If you watch painters on YouTube, sometimes their palettes just look a mess, but I just feel like if we stay a little bit more organized, we can paint a little bit faster and save some pigment along the way. All right, so I'm going to pick up some paint. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So I dabbed my brush on the paint, right? And then I flipped it. So I have 6 equal kind of dabs of paint.
Sorry to interrupt, but is that your large brush or your medium brush?
I'm sorry, that's my medium brush. So
okay, thank you.
So now we're going to kind of try to fit in between all these little spaces like stained glass. Our small brush will be too small and our big brush will be too big. So the medium is kind of the way to go. All right, so we're going to take a little bit of this green paint. So this will be the edge that I grabbed green, I mean. So I didn't even get any white paint in my green, which is good. So I'm just going to dab a couple of times. Now I have this kind of intense, kind of aqua paint here. Now what I can do is I can add a little bit of red. So I'm going to take the corner of my brush and I'm just going to tap just a little bit, the tiniest bit of red here. I'm going to add that, and you can see it kind of makes it more gray. Everybody see how it grayed out a little bit? Anytime you mix, well, this green here is more on the bluer side. It's like a bluish kind of green. So we got this kind of like purplish kind of gray here. All right, you might have something slightly different. And if yours is still too green, since we're painting the sky, you could take a corner of blue and add that there. So let's see what happens when that happens. So I'm just going to take, blue is a very intense color, right? I'll add that. So now we have a bluish kind of gray. Now this looks a little too dark for me, right? So we're going to be testing values as we go. Values are the lights and darks. So I'm going to grab some more white. I grabbed it on the edge that I originally went to. And I'm going to bounce my colors like a basketball. If you paint in circles, if you swirl, you are spreading that paint all over your canvas, your palette. It will dry out and it will stick to your plate. We want to keep it as close and tight as possible. If it starts to get a little tacky, right, what you can do, you take your water and you take just the tip of the brush, right? So when you dip the water, it's just literally the tip of the brush entering the water, and you can add it to your paint, which will free it up a little bit. Now, what that might do is it might homogenize your color a little too much. It might make it too even. If you want to have a little bit more fun with the pigments, I wouldn't mix them so much so they're just one solid color. Okay. So you would you would grab white, add it to your pile. You're going to have to mix more paint. You're going to take white, add it to your pile. You're going to grab some green. You're going to make that intense kind of green color, that light green. You're going to add red, right? You're going to add red, just a corner of red. You can see how I have just a little dab of paint where I grabbed it. So I'm always going to come to this spot so I don't contaminate the rest of my paint. It's going to make a nice little grayish light color. If it's still not blue enough, if it looks a little funny to you, you can add just a little bit of blue to that, right? Now that might lower the tonal value, right? It might become more gray and dark. You might have to add a little more white. Don't let it get too dark. We don't want this dark, murky sky. That's why I said kind of lean on white a little bit more than you think, right? I wish there was a cool saying that I can come up with to explain how adding more white will kind of help you in this particular case. And I'm reminded of my friend. He went bow fishing in Louisiana with these kind of like with these Cajun. I guess he went with some Cajun folk out there, and they had an interesting way of explaining how to do this. When they're aiming for the fish, right? So imagine a bow and arrow with a string connected to it, shooting at the fish. They would say, aim it low and a little bit more. So I wish I had a funny saying like that. So when I say like add white, I gotta come up with something funny and catch it like that. That'd be great. So yeah, I'm getting off subject here, but just don't let the color of the sky get too dark. That's all I'm saying. All right, so let's start to paint. So when we come into these sections here, it's going to be kind of like a stained glass window. We're going to be taking our sections. Now I want you to, I said this is kind of like a painter's kind of painting. We're mark making, right? So I want you to experiment with pressing the brush, see what pigments kind of pop out, right? I want you to change direction. So I'm coming down with my brush, but I'm also coming sideways, right? I'm pushing diagonally. And then I'm kind of letting it sit. I don't want to keep licking it. If you keep licking it, you're just mixing the pigments more homogeneously, and you're going to get one solid plain color. And we kind of wanted to have character, right? So you're going to mix the paints on your plate loosely. You're going to bring it to your canvas, and you're going to confidently place a mark, move to another spot, make another mark, right? And you're going to kind of make a mosaic of marks and paint to fill up these spaces. So I ran out of paint already. I didn't mix enough, right? So that gives me another opportunity to mix up some more paint. Now that might mean that I mix different amounts, which is not such a bad thing, because that'll give me new colors to appear on my painting. Now, as long as we're using the same colors, they'll be harmonious, right? We're making all of our colors. So anytime you have, like, if you're using 12 different colors on the palette, there's a good chance your painting will be, it won't be as harmonious as it could be, right? So we could see how this intensity of blue has changed a little bit. It's not quite that aqua, and that's fine. I can actually introduce this color back up to the top in small amounts, right? Just so I'm harmonizing this section with that section, right? So down here in this section, I'm going to, you guys can see how much paint I have just kind of sitting. You can see all the different colors kind of interplaying. I'm going to take that and I'm just going to lay that down. And however it lays, I'm just going to let it sit for a while. I'm going to fill in the rest of that space with that mosaic kind of quality. And that's it. I'm going to move on. If you want to change it later, if you're not happy with the result, you have that option. But just for the sake of time, and just for the sake of letting it sit and see how it comes out, right? You want to be kind of pleasantly surprised here. Let's just leave it and keep painting all the sections. So we're going to focus on the rest of the sky. So you guys have you have your source material there. I hope everybody's looking at that other painting. You can see where the sky is. Well, your drawing is also probably different. So, oh, picked up a little too much green. So I swiped, I wasn't looking correctly. And you guys can see I swiped this big piece of green here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up white, I'm going to pick up red and that other blue. And I'm not going to pick up this green because it's already here on my canvas. So if I wanted to match it to the other colors, I'm going to let this green on the canvas kind of do that for me. Now you can see that the darkness of this, it's much more, you can see the separation in lightness. So what do I need to add? A little bit more white. If this doesn't work, if adding the white doesn't work, if I added too much strong pigments and I can't quite get it to the lightness that I like, I'm going to leave it and let it dry, because I can always paint over it later. So in painting, acrylics are forgiving in that way, meaning that if you don't like something, just wait a little bit, be patient, and you'll be able to change it later. All right, so I'm going to keep going. So I'll let you guys kind of paint at your leisure. And I'm just going to fill in my sections. And then when we're all on the same kind of page.
Question about the vertical lines that we drew that were meant to be the branch.
The trees?
So, the trees, yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to paint them in afterwards. We're painting the whole background first, right?
We're painting the sky. So skip the trees. Leave
but
them
the
blank.
Trees have, so I'm confused about the line. I guess so on your, where are your trees actually? Because I'm only seeing one line. I'm not seeing the dimension.
So I drew 4 lines. I drew one line on this side, and I'm using the edge of the canvas as that tree.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Then I did the exact same thing on this side. This is actually where I started, right? I drew a line going straight down here.
Yeah.
That's 2 lines. And then I added another tree here. I did, you know, 2 lines that are skinnier than my outermost trees.
Okay.
Okay. So if we go back to the picture, right?
Oh,
can
right. Okay.
Right? You see how this tree is on the left, this tree is on the right, and then we have this skinny little tree in the in between.
Okay. Thank
All right.
you.
No
Helpful. My trees are big trees.
That's why I was trying to use my thumb as a measuring tool, right? When I was saying you know, make them only 1 digit wide or 2, you know, maybe 2 digits wide, so the length of your thumb, right? It's about 1 inch. So I was holding up my thumb. So my digit is from here to here, so that's about 1 inch. So if I move my arm, my hand over, I have 1 digit, 2 digits, so that's about 2 inches. And I was using that to gauge the width of my trees. And then the width of this tree is about 1.5 digits. So if you paint over your branches just a little bit, if you get some paint on them, don't worry, because the intensity of the pigments we're going to use later will cover that no problem. The important thing is to paint up to the branches. Don't leave this little halo section around. Don't try to save the branches. The branches are the least important part. We'll be able to paint over them no problem. One other thing I want to point out is the intensity of the sky. So right now I'm looking at my painting. This is what reminded me. The intensity of the sky is actually brighter between the birds. So if we look at the main picture here, do you guys see how the sky, right? We have the lightest colors here, and the colors become more intense as you leave the main 2 birds. That kind of creates a focal point. So the sky in between the 2 cardinals should appear lighter than anywhere else on the painting. Does everybody see that? All right, we're really trying to create a focal point in between these 2 birds to bring the viewer here. This is where the good stuff is happening. Right, so I can tell that my sky is way too dark there, so I'm going to lighten it up. All right, I am just about done. So remember, it's creative mark making, making a mark, dragging, changing the direction, lifting the brush, changing direction, maybe even squeezing out some of that paint. So when I'm squeezing, I'm laying it on its side, I'm pushing down and I'm rolling my brush, and you can see some of that pigment sneak out, right? And you'll get different kind of color combinations there, and you just push it around. Maybe even move it to other sections over here, so kind of harmonizing our colors. But what we don't want to do is just keep over mixing and licking in one spot over and over and over again. All right, we're going to get a boring background. So again, this is kind of like a alla prima effect. Alla prima is Italian for in one go, right? In one shot. There is no layering. There's I mean, we're going to be doing some layering because acrylics just dry so quick. But if we were using oils, it would take weeks for that paint to dry. So in one shot really means one shot. The paint is wet and you apply it as quickly as, well, not as quickly as possible, but you get the full effect of the painting in one shot. All right, so far this is what my painting looks like. If I need to adjust anything later, I'll adjust it later. A quick view of my palette. Here's that mishap. I swiped into the green by accident. I wiped some of it off, and then I just kept mixing. I think this is where the picture-in-picture works. Yeah, I gotta reverse that.
So on my drawing, the right side, the branch, sorry, the tree on the right side is really quite wide, but it might be, might be interesting. I don't know if it's realistic.
Well, the larger the tree, it could also imply the closer it is to us.
Ah, okay.
You know what I mean? So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
So in drawing, yeah, that's a big thing with perspective, maintaining things. So these are all trees. If these are all mature trees, say it's a mature forest, so all the trees are the same age, right? They would probably be close to the same size and diameter. You figure the environment around them is very equal, right? There's not too much, this tree isn't on steroids and the other ones, they're kind of like sickly and, small. So imagine all the trees are the same size. The distance is what would dictate how big the trees appear on your drawing. The larger it is to your face, right? The closer it is to your face, the larger it is. And the further away it is, the smaller it be, right? So this skinny tree just kind of pushes it in the back. And we're going to also push that, that linear perspective with atmospheric perspective. We're going to make these trees in the background appear less bright than this branch. So this branch is connected to a tree that's so close doesn't even fit in the image. Okay, so imagine this branch leads to a trunk that's just off our canvas here. And we're really close. We're zoomed in on these guys. So that means everything in the background is kind of pushed further away. It's going to be less intense and smaller, right? So it's just like my fist. My fist looks huge here and it looks tiny here, right? In reality, my fists are the same size, right? If I put my thumb up, right? My thumb, that's funny. It looks like my thumb's gonna crush the other thumb, right? So big thumb closer to you, small thumb further away. In reality, they're the exact same size. It's like that trick that kids do, or you're gonna squeeze somebody's head. Or that, what's that photo in Pisa, Italy, where everybody's holding up the Leaning Tower? All right, the camera is close to the viewer and far away from the tower. How are we doing on time? 2:16. Okay, is there anyone still working on the background? Or the sky, I should say? Because now we're going to move on to the trees. Okay, so we're going to move on to the trees. Now, the base layer for the trees, we're going to make kind of like a muddy kind of brown color. And the muddy brown color will be, I'm going to share the image. Okay, so if you see that sandwich dark spot in the middle, where it kind of looks like a murky kind of brown, right? That's the color we're going to mix, but we're going to make it the entire tree. It isn't until that dries that we're going to add the light side, right? So the side that the white that appears on the right sides of the trees, you can see that's consistent with each tree. All the main intense light is hitting from the right. And then on the left side, we get this less intense, this muted kind of light. This represents reflected light. So any light bouncing off the world, right, that's coming back this direction is less intense. It's not the source of light, it's bounce light. So it's weaker. It appears less intense. And then you get this sandwich light kind of effect going on. You have a bright light, you have a muted light, and then you have this section that doesn't receive light at all. It's a light sandwich. This direction, this direction. This plane is not bouncing light off to your eye, so it appears darker. So in order to get our sandwich started, the first layer, we're going to just do this under layer, this muddy brown kind of color. And it's also going to be the same thing with the sky, where we're mixing up color, but we're not doing it homogenously, right? Now it has to be a brown color. So yellow, we're going to have to start with yellow. I'm also using my large brush. Okay, I'm using my large brush to get the big sections done quickly. If we need to step down the size of the brush to get into other areas, we can always do that. I'm going to pick up some yellow. I'm going to designate a little mixing spot here. I'm going to mix a little bit of red, make an orange. So you can already see that we're moving closer to brown already. Right, whenever you mix yellow and red, right, it doesn't make a perfect orange. Like if you were to get a tube of orange and put it down, the intensity of orange would be, a lot more than this orange. It's always, whenever you're mixing from primaries, you're always going to get muted versions of those colors. We could try mixing in the green, because green has a little bit of, it has blue, but it also has a good deal of yellow, right? So let's see what happens if we mix in this green. Okay, so that's a little too on the green side. So I'm going to add, red and green are opposites on the color wheel. So if this color that I'm trying to mix appears too green, I'm going to neutralize it with some red. I'm closer to my brown. Okay, but it appears still a little too dark for my taste. So I'm going to add some yellow. Here's the other thing that you don't learn until you actually start using paints. Oh, by the way, I'm also bouncing my color. I'm not swirling. Don't swirl your paint. Colors, when they're wet, look brighter. As they dry, acrylics in particular, they usually dry like a stop darker, just a slightly darker. Right. So this color here appears good on my plate, but it's wet. So I'm just gonna add a little bit more yellow, just because I know that as it dries, it's going to be a step darker. All right, so it doesn't have to be evenly painted. We're just going to let the colors kind of dance on the canvas. All right, so I'm going to start here in this section. So just like we did with the sky, we're going to make kind of like, we're going to paint it like a stained glass window, right? Like a mosaic. We're going to do it in sections, right? I'm going to leave the branches around it. And what that emphasizes is kind of like mark making. You have to move the brush and change its direction. All right, I'm sorry, I'm not showing. So I'm starting side to side, up and down. As I come to this angle, I'm using the knife's edge, right? So that knife's edge there, you can line it up with the branch below and then pull up. That's kind of like a shorthand of using the tip of this brush. If I get some brown on this branch, that's fine, because we're going to come back later with some outlining, and we're going to you know, that pigment is going to be very intense. So it's going to, you know, go over whatever paint is there, no problem. So don't be afraid to paint up to the line. And if it goes over, that's fine too. We can always fix it later. Not, I shouldn't say fix, we can address it later. So you're just going to make a light, kind of like a fun brown. So remember, you start with yellow. Get a good amount of yellow, because we know that's the least intense color that we have. As soon as we start adding the other colors, we're going to want to beat them up. All right, I added red. I'm adding a little bit of the green. Oh, my green is a lot more intense. So you see how that green is kind of like bullying its way with the other pigments? So that might tell me that the pigment in the red that I have is not that intense, right? If I had a higher grade of red, that probably wouldn't happen. But this is kind of more like a study kind of brand, right? All right, so now I added red, but I added too much red. All right, so I'm going to go back to yellow. And this is the relationship that we have with painting. It's kind of like ebb and flow. We learn the colors that mix with each other, right? And then we mix the colors that neutralize some other colors, right? So I had too much green. I needed some red to kind of combat that intense green. Then it got too red and too dark. So I got some yellow and I added that, and I got back to my light brown. Now there's a good chance that this isn't the same brown that I mixed before, but that's okay. Because that's only going to add to the character of the painting. Like, it can't be too far off. It can't be just like an entirely different intensity of brown. Like you can see that red really shining through on this painting over here. So I can just come down here and introduce some of that paint to kind of harmonize it. Doesn't have to be, you don't have to paint over the whole thing. You just need to add just a tiny amount. Right, to unify those three sections. So now I'm going to move over to my next tree. All right, so it's getting a little dark for my taste. So all I did was pick up some yellow. So you guys see that intense yellow on my brush? I just picked up some yellow, and I'm going to allow the paint that's already on my brush and the yellow to mix directly on the canvas. So this is where you get kind of unintentional different mixtures of intensity and color. You get variety, right? Variety is good. Like I said, your drawing might differ from yours a little bit. So it depends on where your tree from behind appears. Like I had this little sliver that appears behind this branch. I have this little triangle where the tree appears behind it. If it gets on my cardinal, that's okay. I'm going to paint over it later. Now you kind of get an idea why I wasn't so hung up on the drawing before. We can always add stuff or paint over stuff again, you know, down the road. The idea is to get paint on here quickly so we can keep progressing and making decisions. The faster you paint, the faster you can make other decisions. Change your mind, keep pushing it. The idea is just to keep moving. So I'm over here. Just be careful that you have a cardinal's tail, right? So right above the branch, I have the tail. Cardinal, don't, when you're painting your tree, let's check out the, right? So we have this tail on this far, the cardinal on the right. So when you're painting your tree, don't paint over that. We want to keep that nice and clean so that red will shine through nicely. I think that's only our really area that we have to be careful. Like if you were to paint over an entire branch or like smaller branch, I don't think it would be a big issue. We can always just paint it in later because the branches aren't really a main element. They're kind of supporting roles. The main subjects are the birds, so we want to kind of respect those guys and their space. All right, so if you have a good, if you're using a synthetic brush, really use to your advantage the corners of the brush. So that's a great thing about these acrylic brushes, these handmade brushes. They hold their edges really, really nice. As far as, let's see if I have one. These brushes here, these natural fiber brushes, they have really rough edges, and it's really hard to get, that corner. But with these acrylic brushes, you can use that knife's edge and these corners to your advantage. So even if you're using the large brush to paint broad areas, but if it goes into a fine area that you need a little bit more finesse, you have the corners and the flat edge of this brush to help you there. So you're not constantly switching brushes. This is kind of a nice workhorse. Okay, so after you finish your trees, you're going to put your large brush in the water. I also have my medium brush in there. So any brush that you use that you're not using currently, you can just keep it sitting in the water so the bristles don't inadvertently dry. And because that acrylic polymer is pretty permanent. You could buy, I forget what it's called. It's like some kind of paint remover, but it's kind of caustic. It smells. And you could dissolve the paint off, but it also might damage the brush. So it's just better to use good practices, take care of your tools, right? Wash them out. If you're waiting to use them again, leave them in the water. Like we haven't used this brush, so, or at least I haven't. So that means it's okay to be laying on my table. As soon as I use it though, and I'm not using it, it goes in the water. Okay, it is 2:30. We have another hour and a half. I think after we finish the branch and or laying the first layer of the branch and the birds, we'll take a little break. Maybe a 3 to 5 minute break. A little stretch.
Sam, those
Yes?
front, I mean, the middle ground branches where the birds are sitting, are we doing those later or with a little bit of lighter brown?
These branches here, that's white, that appears white.
The ones that you still have white?
Yeah, we're going to do them next. We're going to do them right now.
Thanks.
Your explanations are excellent. Thank you.
Awesome. You're most welcome. I did go to art school, and I just wish, I guess the thing that drives me to constantly keep explaining stuff, when I was in art school, they didn't explain anything. They were just like, make it rounder. Like, you see this section? Yeah, do it better. And that was it, they would walk away. So I vowed if I ever teach art, man, I'm gonna, I want to be the instructor that I wish I had.
Oh,
All right, so how we doing? Everybody have their trees painted?
Still working on sky. Quick question. Can you need to use your brush again once you put it in the water? Is it okay? Do I have to get a different brush?
No, it's definitely okay. So when you're cleaning off your brush, imagine the brush is all the way down to the bottom, right? And you're pushing it down, and you're going to paint the bottom of the cup, right? So you're going to be pushing down fairly hard, not to the point where the brush is 90 degrees. That can break the bristles. So imagine you're just painting the cup, and do it to a point where you're kind of like making bubbles almost. I don't know, you guys can hear that water kind of moving around. Paint the bottom of the cup, scrape it clean on the edge here, and just give it, a dozen or so swipes on a rag or a paper towel that you have, right? And it should be ready to go.
Okay.
So that's the wonderful thing about acrylics. They are water cleanup. Too much water in the brush, however, is counterproductive. So imagine these brushes are made to hold liquid, water included. So if you leave water hiding in the bristles, pick up paint and then apply it to the canvas, and then boom, you get a run, right? Because they are water soluble. You get this huge run. So it's always a good idea. Like if paints get a little tacky, you can just dip the tip of your brush in and add it to the water. But physically mixing, mixing the water with the paints is not how acrylics are meant to be used. The actual bond of the polymers, right, when they dry, they kind of dry like this and they interlock, and it makes it very stable and like plasticky. If you ever, run your fingers over an acrylic painting, it feels like plastic. That's what it is. It's literally liquid plastic. As you add water, those bonds become further and further apart, so that when it dries, the polymers don't dry close enough, and you can actually wipe it away, right? So water, great for cleanup, great for adding just a little bit of, looseness if it gets tacky, but the polymer has to be able to do its thing.
Here.
All right, so let's mix the branches. So now these branches are going to be the lightest of the branches. So we don't have to, we just need to differentiate them from the background. So let's take a look at so you can see, if you look at this white here and the white here, it is more intense on this branch, but look at the color on the edge of the branch. You see how it appears more gray? And then this brown here, right? It appears more intense than the brown in the back. So think of the brushes, the branches that are closer to you, the colors are more intense. That means the whites are whiter and the browns and blacks are darker. Okay, so that's how we differentiate different levels of depth. Okay, so we are going to kind of make like a gray color.
now are you going to mix with the large brush and then use a smaller brush for these?
Nope, we're going to use the medium-sized brush. We're going to use the medium-sized brush, okay, to mix everything up. So we can actually mix right where we were making our trees before, right? So I'm going to take yellow and red and some blue. I'm going to go a little bit heavier on the blue and red to make it kind of like a murky kind of grayish color. See that color?
Yeah.
And then with this, so it's yellow, red, and blue. I'm really focusing on the red and blue to make it more intense. That doesn't mean swipe blue and swipe red and smack it down. It's take a little bit, add it, take a little bit of red, add it. If it still needs to be more intense, take a little bit more of red, a blue, a little bit more of red. Because remember, yellow it really can't compete with the intensity of these other colors. So not so we don't lose all that yellow. If you go too far with red and blue, it would take 10 times the amount of yellow to bring it back to the color that you need, right? You can always add a little bit more of blue and yellow, blue and red, rather than mountains of yellow. All right, so we can then move to a nice clean spot on our white. And I'm just gonna add just a little bit of white to this, just so we can see that it is in fact kind of like a grayish kind of brown. All right, and that's going to help us with the base color of our branch. So once again, I'm going to share so you guys can see this grayish color on the edge. All right, we're going to paint the entire branch this color so that when we're painting the highlights, all we have to do is hit it with white. Okay, so gray will be the entire branch, and then white, and then the darker colors will appear over that gray. So the base color will be this gray color that we're mixing. And it's okay that it varies in hue and intensity, right? Because that's just going to create more character, right? So the whole branch, you're going to paint all your branches this color. It'll look different in different areas. That's perfectly fine. So if you want, you can paint in a kind of safe spot. So the safest place would be in the center. I can press as hard as I want without breaking my brush, of course. And you know, when you press hard, the bristles spread, right? You get a much wider line. The less you press, the closer they stay together. A safe spot, if I were to press and spread those bristles out, I get a nice wide line and I'm safe. I didn't go outside. It's not until I get to the edges where I turn and I use the knife's edge to help define those areas. Right, so you can really push paint around fairly quickly in the center of the branch, but then when you get to the edge, switch to the knife's edge and move side to side. So now you know why the pencil lines, we didn't have to erase them, because this color will go right over it. You won't even notice them. It was kind of like whenever I explain painting to children, or drawing to children, I always kind of compare building with Legos, right? So you're taking smaller pieces and you're adding them together to make this really big thing, right? It's the same thing with painting and drawing, where we take smaller bits and shapes and curves and lines, and we're building them up to make more complex shapes. So we can build tons of complexity from simple shapes. So the intensity of the gray, remember, it doesn't have to be too dark, right? So make sure that you're adding that white to it, because if you don't add the white, it's going to appear very, very dark and murky. And we wanted to have some kind of lightness to it. So when you're painting with the medium brush, paint as far as you can go using the medium brush. And then if you need to switch, like for the finer edges of the branches, you can switch to the smaller brush. I like to live dangerously, and I like to go as far as I possibly can with the larger brush. If I need to paint something back in later on, if I go too far, I could either wipe it, something away with a rag very gently. If you press too hard, especially with a wet rag, you'll go right to the canvas. You'll rip everything off. But if you press lightly, you can wipe stuff off, or you could just let it dry and then match it later with that color that was underneath. So as you can see, I'm trying to be as economical as possible with time using the larger brush. I'm pressing very lightly. When you press lightly, the bristles stay close, and I'm trying to lean on that knife's edge where I'm getting into the skinnier parts, right? Just to save on a little bit of time here. If you don't feel comfortable with that, that's fine too. Just keep on painting. Okay, so I got pretty far. With the medium brush, I'm going to put that brush in the water. I'm going to switch to my smaller brush. I used up all my paints and I'm going to mix some more. So for the tips of the brush, I mean the tips of the branches, the intensity can be fairly dark. You don't have to add so much white. All right, we can make the tips of the branches much darker. So I don't think I added any white. Now with the branches, the tips of the branches, there's two ways to do this. If you don't feel confident of controlling the pressure of the brush, right? If you load your brush and you go to the very tip of the branch and you push, you're going to get a blob, right? You're going to get a blob at the thinnest portion of the branch, which goes against, nature, what the branches actually do. So you could start on a wider part of the branch and you could paint towards the edge of the branch, which I recommend. But then I would go in the opposite direction and then I would paint back into my branch. Okay, so here's how I did it. I start inside the branch and I paint away, right? And as I'm going away, I'm lifting the brush and I get a much thinner line there. If you feel confident, you could paint from the outside in, but you have to really control the pressure of the brush, very light pressure, because you have a lot of paint, right? So there's two ways of doing it. There's not just one way, right? And both of them are valid. It's just a confidence thing. Which one do you feel more confident with? But either way, I'm painting back into my branch to kind of harmonize those colors, right? I just don't want this gray paint and then dark paint. I need some overlap, right? We need some consistency, right? It's all about harmonizing. So if you see me start on the outside of the branch and then paint in, don't feel like you necessarily have to paint it that way. That was my main point. You guys probably aren't even watching me paint. You probably just totally zoned in into your own painting, but I figured I'd explain it. Okay. All right.
Hey, Sam, I'm going to step away for like 5 to 10 minutes really quick. I'll be back.
No problem. Okay. And the last step that I want to do, if you still paint your branches, continue. This last step is very easy. We're just going to take plain yellow. I'm using my medium brush. It's nice and clean. I clean it out in the water. And I'm going to give one coat to the birds. I'm just going to go straight over them, pencils included, painting everything yellow. Wow, that almost looks green on the computer screen. Right, so sometimes it's good to put a base yellow for something that you want to be intensely red. And why is that? Because due to the translucency of red, light passes through it. And what color is the board that you're working on? It's probably pure white. So that means the light is going to pass through the red, bounce off the white and red, and it might appear more pink or magenta. Right, so it's mixing optically. So if we put this base yellow, and that still happens, yellow's translucent, right? That's why you can still see the pencil marks. It's like painting with saran wrap, yellow saran wrap. The light bounces, hits the board, comes back at us, and that yellow and the red will mix to maintain its intense redness. Okay, and at this point, we're going to take a little break. We'll come back at 2:55. I'll come back at 2:55. So if you want to continue painting, do so. I'm going to refresh my water. So I'm going to clean out my water a little bit. It's getting a little murky. You might want to do the same. And then we'll join back up. Okay.
Sounds good.
Everything hurts.
Sam, I think if you're talking, you're on mute. We don't hear you.
I haven't. I'm messing with my camera settings. But thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to be on top of this mute stuff as much as possible. Okay, it's 2:56. Everybody back? We're waiting for anyone? Okay, so let's see. Okay, so let's start with the trees in the back again. Okay, so now we're going to go back to our kind of like our mosaic theme here. We're going to be adding different colors. We're going to be adding an intense white, right? And then a muted grayish color on the left side, and we're going to leave the center brown. So the middle of the tree will represent our, right? So if I was looking at here, it's probably like a finger's width, my finger anyway, right? So if my tree is about 1.5 inches wide, I'm thinking about the width of my finger will remain this color, and then white will occupy here, and then the muted grayish color will be over here. Same thing over here. We're going to have white, muted brown, reflected light. Same thing. White, muted brown, and then the muted gray. Okay, so how do we mix that? Well, we're gonna make the first white very simple. We're just gonna take mostly white. So I'm taking my medium brush. I'm loading a fair amount. Remember, this is going to be the light side. So the right side of the trees. I'm going to tap out a little bit here. I'm going to pick up just the slightest bit of blue and the slightest bit of red. Right? And we should have a very light gray. Now, I think I want it even a little bit lighter than this. So I'm going to go back to my white. I'm going to go to this dirty pile over here. I still want to keep my reservoir clean. Right, and I'm just going to add a little bit more white. So I'm thinking of in the future that you can see the intensity of white. This was going to be our main branch. The branch that the birds are sitting on is going to be this white. I want the other whites behind it to be less intense. So they're going to be closer to this. Okay. So you can see the difference. It's not much. So if you see any more difference on your plate, you've made your colors too dark, right? You've added too much blue and red and you haven't added enough white. If it gets too dark, if it's too gray, right? Just make another dot next to it with a little bit of the paint, right? Don't scoop any of this paint over. Just use what's actually scrape off what you have. This is now, again, this is only if you've made your color too dark. Scrape off as much color as you can, keep it in one spot. That'll be like your reservoir. Then start a new spot, right? With that new color, like this. Pick up some more white, and you're gonna make another version of it. So with this color, imagine if this was too dark. I've just made another version of this color, just one step lighter. Okay, so that's a nice trick where you don't have to waste so much paint. So I just moved over, I scraped off, imagine I scraped off any excess paint that's too dark. I moved over, I started again, I added more light paint, and I have my next color of intensity. Okay. All right, so going back to this gray. Is everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so now I'm going to come over and let's test it on this big section here, right? Because this is probably the cleanest, most accessible shape. So I'm just going to start making my section here. Now remember, we're going to outline the tree. So you see how my white doesn't go all the way to the line. That's okay. Right? Because when we come over next time, you know, any kind of what's that called? Discrepancy between the colors will be unified by the line, right? So it's going to have more of a graphic quality, you know, in the long run. Graphic meaning it has outlines, right? So I'm not being too discriminating as far as this edge here, right? So I have kind of like a dry edge, a dry brush going on. Oops. Right? So if you look at that edge there, you can see how it's not a perfect, clean, sharp line. It has some feathering, right? The white is fading into the brown, which is fine. Okay, so if you see that on your painting, I always go the wrong way. That's okay. All right, and now you're going to continue this pattern for the rest of the tree trunk. Straight down. And as a matter of fact, you're going to do that for all 3 trees. Remember, don't let this get too light. Don't let it get too dark.
Sam, it's not really covering. Is it because there's too much water in the white to dilute it and not have an opaque effect?
I'm sorry, could you say that again a little louder?
I'm sorry. It seems like it's not covering, and is the reason because there's too much water in the white mix and it's not acting like an opaque color anymore?
Yeah, you shouldn't have any water in your whites.
Got it. Thank
It
you.
should just be pure pigment. White is probably the most opaque color other than black. Black is a very intense color. The white should, it almost acts like an eraser. If I was to paint white over this, it would cover everything underneath. So if it's appearing as translucent, if you look see-through, then it's too thin. And you got some water sneaking into your pigments. Remember, water is only our friend during cleanup. We want to keep it out of the paint as much as possible. If you need more paint, go to the bottle, not to the water. Okay, I'm going to go on to my second tree. I've run out of paint. I'm gonna have to mix some more. Right now we're in the there's a term for it. We're in the ugly zone. So our painting doesn't look like much. All right. If we were to stop right now and show this to our friends, like, hey, what do you think of my painting? They're going to say, I think you should try something different. So we're working our way through the painting. This is always like, imagine like walking through a forest. Like we're doing a forest painting. Imagine walking through a foggy forest and you don't know where you're going. You're kind of trying to get to the other side. You can't see it, but you know it's there. We're like in that zone. The idea is to keep pushing through. Don't second guess. Just keep going. If you cover some of your branches, that's fine. That white, it is opaque, so if you paint over a branch, that branch probably gone. But we can always get it back later. Yeah, just be careful with that tail of the cardinal. So I just noticed as my paint is dry, I'm looking back at my first tree, that color dried a little bit darker. Remember I said the acrylics, they look lighter when they're wet. So when it dried, it looked a little bit darker than I wanted it. So I'm going back over, I'm adding a little bit more white to my mixture. And I'm just gonna hit it again one more time. Very quickly, not too much. I don't need to cover every little bit that I did the first time. I just want a little bit more intensity in that white, like that, especially down here. It looks very, very gray. And I just wanted it to be kind of like a quiet white. Not a very loud, bright white. So now you can see why white, we're very dependent on white in this painting.
My branches are rather browny brown, whereas yours are more dark cocoa. So can I touch them up later with like add a little bit of black?
Well, we're not done with the branches yet. We still have a lot more to do with the branches. So maybe what we do later can address that.
Okay.
If it doesn't still, then we'll revisit that. We'll see what happens.
Thank you.
All right. All right, so I have my right side of my trees done. I'm going to move on to the left side. Now, the left side is very similar. There's just more of the darker pigments. So we leaned on white much more in that one, right? To create a very faint kind of grayish tone. is almost white, right? It's not quite white. And now we're going to make the same color, but with just less white. So that's why it's muted, right? Muted meaning just less intense. So I'll grab some red. I'll grab some blue. Now, to me, that looks awfully purple, right? Red and blue, that's what you're going to get. We could add just a little tap of that green for a more muted color. Maybe a little bit more red. All right, so we have this murky kind of grayish color. So remember, there's yellow and green. So not only are we just adding green, but it's really yellow and blue, right? So by adding, I have red and blue here. Now I just needed to add a little bit more yellow, but rather it add or invite the intense yellow, I just need just a fraction of yellow. And I know I could find that yellow and green. This is kind of where like color theory and like, you know, color harmony comes into play. If you know the characteristics of the colors that you're working with, you can take shortcuts like that and be confident in the color that you're going to get, right? Some people see green just as green, but if you start to look at it as combinations of other colors too, you'll know that there's yellow in that, and I can use that to my advantage, right? So my paint just dried out. All right, so I got to mix more. So yeah, we are going to be painting quite a bit of these colors. I kept having to mix it over and over. So let me mix just a little bit more than usual. So it looks very dark. I'm going to go to my reservoir here. I'm going to have to pour some more. And I'm going to add white to this. All right. And you can see when they're side by side, you can see they're like night and day. Let's see what happens when we add it to the canvas. Oh yeah, that's very dark. So remember, we want to keep that brown. We want to keep that brown in the middle. You want it to be about as wide as your finger. Don't let it get too skinny. And now trees have an imperfect surface, so that line doesn't have to be laser straight like you see the outside edge of the canvas. We don't want that on our tree. Our tree surface has character, so it can meander a little bit, right? It can waver. We can't have it snake, right? But it can have a little bit of character to it. It doesn't have to be laser straight. So applying the brush in brush strokes should be plenty straight as far as what we need. Okay, so now we have that round effect kind of going there. I'm going to move on to my next tree. You know what's, all right, so what just dawned on me is that now that I look at the colors on my canvas drawing, this is supposed to be the reflected light zone, and this appears much darker than this middle zone. So that means I went way too dark with this reflected light, because reflected light is supposed to appear darker than the brown. So there's two things you could do here. We might not have time for both, but you could change this brown into a darker brown. Maybe we went too yellow to begin with, or we just adjust this color so it's lighter than this one, but darker than this one. All right. So if we're going in order from light to dark, this is a number 1. This should be number 2, and this should be number 3. Light or lightest, second lightest, third lightest, okay? So right now, my left side of the tree appears darker than this. So I got to adjust. I'm going to add some white to the colors that I was just mixing. And I'm going to apply it and see if I can get that intensity where I need it to be. All right, that looks a little bit better. I'm going to keep pushing it. I'm going to add a little bit more white. Remember, it only has to be a lighter, a slightly darker than the light side. All right, I think that's much better. So you can see the difference in intensity, right? If you look at this, this set of colors here versus this gray appears much darker than this brown. And I need it to be lighter than this one. And I think I achieved that here. So we get that kind of like three-dimensional turn, right? 1 plane, 2 plane, 3 planes. So I'm going to adjust that to my other trees.
And Sam, sorry to interrupt, but can you just repeat the colors you used for that left side of the tree?
Sure. So I'm using, let's see, I'll mix it for you. I'm kind of running out. So I'm using red and blue and a little bit of the green. Okay, and
Thank
then,
you.
yep, and then white to lessen the intensity because those are some dark pigments. I don't want to lessen it to the point where it's equated to our first color. This is our first color. It has to be darker than this color, but lighter than the brown color. Oops. All right. Okay. All right, I have my 3 sides now. Funky Neapolitan. I'm going to pour some more white paint because I've run out. Okay, so next I'm going to use some pure white. So I've cleaned out my brush, right? And now I'm going to add some pure white to this branch so we can really, I guess, differentiate from the background. So right now it looks a little weird because this branch appears much darker than the background. Now we're going to make this branch pop out. And I'm just going to take plain white. Remember, this is our most intense white on the page, right? Because it's closest to us. And I'm going to do just the center of that branch. White. Now, if you use a dry brush I can't speak. If I use a dry brush technique, I can make this appear like it's turning in space by just scraping just a little bit of white over the darker gray. So that means I'm using more paint towards the middle, right, to make it look opaque. But as I move to the edges, I'm using less paint, making it thinner so that the gray underneath kind of visually looks like it's mixing with the white. Okay, so here's an example. If I just scrape it on very lightly, right, this looks darker than this. I have less paint here and more paint here. And as I add paint, it becomes more and more intense, right? Because you've increased the amount of paint. So as you increase the white, we might have to do this another time, right? Because as it dries, it might appear a little bit gray because we have such a dark color underneath.
Sam,
Right.
so this is the pure white.
Yeah, all I did was I just picked up white. I poured some new white paint and I just picked it up and I started painting in the center of my branch.
Thank you.
Yep. And what I'm saying is that the thicker, the more paint applied to the center of the branch, the more intense that white becomes. Right? We're trying to emphasize the roundness of the branch. So we want intense white in the center and like just scraped on white towards the edges so that you get, let's see if I can zoom in on this. Right? So if you look in this section here, I just scraped on white. I did not mix that gray. That's pure white, scraped over very thinly on the gray branch underneath. So this is what we start with. If I take that pure white and I very lightly scrape it over, right? If I put it on too intensely, I can just wipe it off also. You get a gray kind of color, right? So it's like the pigments underneath are pushing through the white. And as I'm going along, right, the amount of white has to be thinner inside the branches, right? So be careful how much pressure you're putting on your brush. I'm using the medium brush, so like I said, I like to live a little dangerously. I probably paint way too long with the brush, where I should be going to a smaller brush. And that's because I'm lazy. Okay, we're still in that ugly zone. We're still working our way through. All right, so when you have, now you don't have to bring the white all the way to the tips of the branches. You can see how I leave the intensity of the tips of the branches, and that's fine. I'm just getting the middle of that branch, right? I'm getting some kind of play of color. It almost looks like there's a lot of playing with the mark making, but I'm trying to concentrate the amount of pigment towards the center of that branch to give it a more round appearance. Right now, I want to move on to the Cardinals. It's 3:20. We have another 40 minutes. So we got to bring this on home. Okay, so for the Cardinals, I'm going to paint with my medium brush again. I'm going to start with the red, picking up pure red, and not too much. I want to thinly paint. You can see how intense that red is. Now I'm going to just paint the left side of my Cardinals. Being very dangerous up at the top. Now I painted over the eye area somewhat, right? That heart area, that's supposed to be black. That's not a problem. Black will go over that very easily. All right, so we want the more intense red to be on the left side and undersides of our cardinal. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. So I'm going to focus on the left side. If you need to switch to a smaller brush, please do so if you don't feel quite as confident. So you can see I've kind of, I've really separated my shadow areas from my light areas, right? And that's literally just, I'm looking at the simple shape of it, right? Think of it like a water balloon or teardrop. And whatever appears on this side, right, and underneath, right, because the cardinal curves underneath, that's going to be in shadow. The light is hitting from the top, so this will be a less intense red. Same thing over here, right? The light is coming from here. We're going to make a less intense red. So I'm going to use yellow, and the red that's on my brush, actually, yeah. So my brush is already red. Rather than cleaning my brush and making it orange, I'm going to take my red brush and I'm going to tap some right into the yellow. I'm going to tap out some of that color just to see how it looks. And what do you know? I have a less intense kind of red here. It's like a reddish orange. So that when we put that here, it should appear slightly lighter. Maybe it's too intense. So it looks a little too similar now that I look at it. That red that's on my brush, I'm going to wipe off. I don't want to clean it off, right? It just invites room for water getting in our brush. I don't want to do that. So I wiped off the red on my brush. I have my yellow. I'm going to pick up some yellow. I'm going to tap it out again. So the red pigment that's in my brush still makes a orangey color, but now you can see it's less intense, right? So it's not, again, it's not a very punchy kind of orange. It's like a muted orange, almost looks like coral. It's a little more intense than coral. And I'm going to add that to this card. I'm going to let this one dry. I'm going to add it to this guy over here. And that edge that I made with the red, I'm going to try to paint on that edge so to unify the two sections. Now, yellow is a very weak color. It has a lot of translucency, so I might have to hit this with another layer.
Regina? Look, dead. What? He's been shot.
You don't have to do this, but I'm going to take regular yellow and I'm just going to put it right on my cardinal and I'm going to paint right on it just to see what happens. And it looks like if that side is still wet, I can lighten that side just a bit more, which might be to our advantage. So I'm taking plain yellow with a dirty brush, right? It has that orangey color on it. And I'm just adding that yellow directly to the canvas to lighten it. Now that's if only you need to, right? If you mix it correctly, the first time you feel like it's satisfactory and you don't want to do that, you don't have to do this step. Well, if you're in the same boat I am, and you need to lighten it a little bit more, I would just hit it with plain yellow and add it directly. I'm using very soft pressure. If I start to press, the wet paint on top will actually attach itself to the paint below and rip it off. It becomes too tacky. It becomes like leather underneath, and your brush could actually rip it off. You get a bald spot, right? So sometimes it's better to just leave it alone, come back to it after it dries, and then paint over it. That doesn't look too bad. I know the reds, I don't think red translates very well on cameras here, on my cameras anyway. I gotta work on the lighting more. But there is a pretty good transition of red and yellow. All right, so you want to give it some three-dimensionality. It's supposed to look like little puffs of fur or little puffs of feathers, right? So you want the more intense red on the left side. And as you move over to the other side, you gradually move into more of an orangey kind of red, right? You don't want to make too orange. Let's see the, let's check the source. So you can see what I'm talking about. There's a light orange here, like an orangey red, and a deeper red on this side. So we're just using red out of the tube to go the intense route over here, and we're adding yellow on this side. If you were to add white, it will be white and red make pink. So you would definitely have to add the yellow to bring it back to red. But that can get away from you pretty quick. The white, might be too opaque. So that's why I'm kind of just playing with the yellow and reds right now. Is everybody doing okay with that particular section? All right.
Yes, except my pencil marks are showing through.
Mm-hmm.
Can I guess I can just touch them up with other things later on.
Sure. Or you could just let it ride, and there's plenty of paint. If you go into the Met Museum, you see pencil marks on some of those paintings.
Oh, I feel so much better.
Yep. Don't I would always approach any kind of painting, especially in this kind of environment, this setting, as an experiment. Right?
Yeah.
This is a very low risk kind of situation, right? And but I mean,
Yeah.
like you're not feeding your family with this painting, in other words. So it's
Sure.
it's a work in progress. It's just for fun, and you're learning. So now you know that pencil marks do show through translucent paintings, right? So
Yeah.
your knowledge just went up. All right, so I'm going to hit up the beaks now. I'm going to switch to my detail brush, and I'm going to mix a orange color, just yellow and red. I don't need white. And you know that the yellow is the weaker of the two. So I've picked up a fair amount of yellow. I've put it over here. Now the color underneath is dry. So that's from way earlier. So sometimes when you're mixing color, it's okay to put stuff on other stuff. I'm going to grab just a tiny bit of red. I'm going to add it. I'm looking for an orange color for their beak. That looks pretty close. I'm going to see how this plays out, because adding red to this orange is going to be a lot easier than try to cover up the beak and start over again, right? So it's easier to sneak up on the color rather than try to nail it on the first shot. So I'm just going to go right over my pencil marks. Okay, that looks decent. Now here's one of those things that you can't really hang out here too long. Put the paint down, step away from it, let it dry, because at this point there's nothing you can really do other than wipe it off. You can't fix the color because it's drying. And when you're trying to put wet color on semi-dry paint, you're just going to rip it off, right? It's going to become like a sticky tape kind of surface. Is going to come off. You're going to get a bald spot. Apply the orange, step away. We're going to move on to, let's see. We're going to move on to adding some dimension to our trees and branches. All right, so with our same brush, you're going to clean off the yellow. Assuming you guys are done with the birds and the beak. How we doing?
Yeah.
Right.
A little,
All right. We're doing good.
behind.
Okay. So the next part, we're going to mix like an intense kind of color. Now, my painting, it leaned more towards like the purplish bluish side, but I think I want to lean closer to the brown side to match kind of this color here, right? I don't want to make it, too purpley. So let's see. I'm going to start with red, and I'm going to add this green, and they neutralize each other pretty well. Now, I really don't know exactly what color I have until I reveal it with some white, right? So this, it looks very nondescript. So I'm going to take a little bit of white, and I'm going to add it here. And you can see as it lightens up, it is more towards the purplish side. So this is the trouble that I got into. I thought if I added red and green together, I was going to get a nice brown. But turns out the blue isn't so intense in my green that it doesn't give me that brown. So the only thing that I can add to this to make it more brown is the yellow. So I'm going to add some yellow to this. And you can see the more yellow you add, it is lightening up somewhat, but those other colors are really intense. But that's about all I need. Right, so I did add yellow to this. If I add white now, let's see what we get. Yeah, it's a little bit more neutral. It's not quite as purpley. I know the colors aren't coming across so perfectly, but I did add yellow to this, so you know it's not the same as this color, right? So this intensity is just right for what I need. So I'm going to rinse off my brush, get that white off because I only want this dark pigment. I'm going to load up my brush, tap, 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 rotate, tap, tap, tap. Okay. So now this is where the outlining comes into place. So get my camera back in. Okay, so I'm going to start on the edge, right? And I'm just going to kind of drag it down. And it doesn't have to be perfect. There can be some, there could be some change in width to the line, right? That's called line weight. You can have a very thin line. You can have a very fat line. I would try to stay away from the fat line, right? Try to make them consistent, but they can waver somewhat. I mean, you almost can't help it because you're holding a brush and you're kind of hovering. The only other thing I would recommend, maybe if you're not confident in hovering over the painting, right? So just painting like this, the lines, what you could do is get fancy, right? Stick out your pinky and use it as a kickstand. And now you can use, now you can use your pinky, but you see how close you have to hold up the brush? You have to choke up way on the brush to use your pinky to stick to the board, right? And now your pinky is stabilizing your hand. But the thing that you're trading off with is distance. You can only paint so far. You constantly have to pick up and then reset up. So I'm living dangerously. I want to give you options. So if you want to put your pinky on the board or canvas and paint, feel free. I'm actually going to fix my hand in space, and I'm just going to flex my fingers, right? And raise my arm up and down from the shoulder rather than my forearm, right? Don't paw at the canvas. If you're going up and down, you start from your shoulder. So loosely lock your wrist, lock your elbow, lock the distance in, and then drop your arm. Don't paw, right? If you're going to lock your shoulder and you do it from the wrist, don't do it from the wrist, do it from your fingers, right? And you might have to flex your wrist and your fingers. There's no right or wrong way. It kind of comes down to preference and what do you feel comfortable with? Now this shouldn't take too long. Like I said, these are trees, and trees can have tons of character. And if you go too slow, it might even be counterproductive. You might get more interesting things if you go a little bit faster than if you have to go a little bit slower. I might just be trying to sell you something though, because I'm running out of time. I'm getting you guys to paint faster.
Can you repeat the colors for the darker color once more, please?
Yep. So I'm just about to mix some more. So I'm taking red, I'm taking green, and I'm going to add yellow. All right, so I have my trees in back. So you can see how just adding those lines adds a lot of solidarity to the painting. I am going to, 1 second.
So we outline the foreground branches with this color, right, Sam?
No, that'll be a little bit different. So we want them to appear a little bit more tense in the front. So we're going to take that same color. I've already mixed it here, right? So it was red, green, and a little bit of yellow, right? The yellow brightens it up a little bit, right? So you get, not, if you compare it to the black, you can see how this is slightly lighter than the black.
Yeah.
Now we're going to take a little bit of black and add it to that. So I want the same color, just more intense. And the black will probably take up almost all of it. So now, oh boy. That glare is tough. Let me see if it shows up better over here.
Well,
Not
we're
so
following
much.
your recipe. It's just different screens, different
Yeah,
color.
I'm trying to show that on my plate, it looks very, it's very obvious the difference.
I mean, we can see the difference. It's okay.
Okay, good.
So, but it's just to clarify. So the first one where there wasn't any black yet, we go
Correct.
around the branches, and now we add black to go for the outline.
Yes.
Okay.
So now when I outline that, you could see that it's the intensity of color should be higher. And I made a mistake. I covered the gray. So here's the thing. You don't want to cover the gray. I went right up to the white and I covered the gray. I didn't aim correctly. So on the gray side, we definitely want to see that gray paint. That's not the outline. Your black line should be just outside of the gray. Okay. Does that make sense? Now for the branches at the top, I am actually covering the gray at the very tip. I want the most intense color at the tip. And then as I progress, let me see if I can show you on the branch. It's a little bit easier to see. So if I start here, I'm going to start with the dark color here. And then as I progress through the branch, I'm going to move to the outside. I don't want to cover that white paint in the center. It's okay to cover it at the tips. We want to keep that thinness there.
So once more, the mixture of the color,
Yeah.
and then we add black. What were the first three colors?
Red, green, and probably just a little touch of yellow.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So now you guys, I progressed a little bit further along, right? You guys can see how I start with that intense color at the tips of the branches. And as I move towards the thicker parts of the branch, then I transition to the outside of those lines, right? So if you could see the unpainted version over here and then the painted version, right? You can see how the intensity plays against the colors in the background. So that kind of helps to separate the different planes, the background and foreground. So this is the part where, say you're going to a fancy party or a wedding. You've done all the preparation work, and now you're putting on the mascara of your makeup. It's the last thing you do. For all you ladies out there, this is the pretty part. This is where it all comes together. This is why I kind of like this sort of painting, like more graphic, where you're dependent upon an outline, because you can play a little bit more fast and loose with colors, because you're going to kind of encapsulate all the other painting stuff with a nice definitive line. Right, so then it becomes more like a stained glass type of painting, or like a mosaic. It's just patches of color, and then they're separated by these tiny borders. Thing is, you want to kind of like not just use color straight out of the tube. You can even if you're adding lines, you can add character to them. You can add colors, right? You can play with line weight in different intensities. Okay. And then now we're going to add some detail to our Cardinals. Okay, and I think just to keep that nice and simple, we're going to just use black. Right, so I have my clean detail brush. And I'm just going to very light, and now I'm definitely using my pinky as the kickstand. Right, I'm going to start at the tip. You don't have to start at the tip of the cardinal. If you want to start kind of halfway down the profile, that's a little less intense for you. You can do that. Now this is when these guys really pop off the canvas. So I didn't want to draw the feathers in earlier, because I figured the pencil would just kind of disappear. So I'm drawing 3 different feathers here. So for the tail feather, I'm going to draw 2 lines starting from the edge of the branch. I'm going to draw 1 line, and then just to the right of the edge here, I'm going to draw this center feather, and by default, that gives me 3 feathers. All right, so I really just had to draw those 2 lines in the center, and then outline the outside, and that gives me 3 feathers. Just to add some interest there. Next, I'm going to outline the face. So it is in the shape of a heart, so try to keep the brush inside the lines that create the heart. If you go over the eyes, if you even drew the eyes, don't worry about that. We're going to add some white and blue. We're going to make them blue. And if you happen to paint over it, we can always paint over the black, because white is opaque and it has that ability. Same thing for the other side. So I'm painting inside that heart shape. If you paint directly on the line, you're going to push the paint outside the line. So you have to start on the inside and work your way up to the edge. work? If some of that yellow shows up from underneath, that's fine. All right, creates a little bit more visual interest. There's the beak line. And then I'm going to go around the bottom of the mouth. Try to go on the outside, because if you paint on the inside of the line there, you won't even see the bottom. You won't even see the bottom of the beak. All right, I'm going to start the other one.
And we switch to colored pencils or something for this detail?
Colored pencils? I don't know how well colored pencils will show up on a canvas. I would go to
What
the
about
smallest
watercolor pencil?
I don't know. I honestly, I don't use those tools. I'm not exactly sure how they would perform on this. I would switch to the smallest. If you're not very confident with this brush, switch to the smallest brush you have. Really focus on using your pinky. I'll turn the canvas to the side. Right, so I'm using my pinky, and I'm way up. I'm touching the metal of the brush. Right, and then when I'm ready, I even have my other finger here. They're both coming in contact with the board. So I have a lot of stability there. And if you need to just do a 1/4 inch at a time, do that.
Okay.
I'd rather you stick to the painting, because I know it'll be cohesive, you know, it'll work. Anytime you mix other medium, I'm not sure how those pencils would hold up. So actually here I did the beak first. And now I'm going to go around the eye shape. Okay. All right, so our birds do have feet. And we're just going to take the black paint, and we're going to do six little marks. We're going to do 3. If you split the bird in half here, that didn't sound so good. But if you bisect the bird, right, on the left side, we'll have 3 marks. 1, 2, 3. And you just do the same thing on the other side. 1, 2, 3. And I did make them slightly curved. And the same thing for this little guy over here. We're going to have 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, and 3. All right, so now I'm kind of glad that we skipped that last section, the last bird, because we would have definitely run out of time. Okay, so we're going to add that little blue dot. Actually, no, we're going to hold off on that. We might get into a little bit of trouble there. So I washed off my detail brush, and I'm going back to my canvas here, and I have this dark pigment here, which was the outline for the branch, right? I'm just going to add a little bit of yellow to that. I think I made it too dark. Let me keep mixing. Okay, that's a little bit better. Okay. So now these trees, they do have some marks on them, right? So they have these little rips in the trunk. They're like splits, and that's where the bark of the tree tends to unwind and gives it like that paper-like quality. I'm going to take that bark, the dark pigment, and I'm just going to pick some spots right here in the center, or it depends on where on the tree. So I'm going to start in this section here. So if you guys just want to take 1 second and just take a look at this, I'm looking at the source material, right? So what I'm really looking at is I'm looking at these marks here, and you can see how there's a curve to it and like a slash quality. So you don't have to be too careful with these. You can actually have fun with these marks as well. And I'm going to show you what I mean. So here in this section, I'm going to do kind of like a curve and kind of a mark like that. Just not being too careful. I'm just kind of swiping along. Just to show you how it can be a little bit easier, I could also just do 2 lines like that. I literally just touch, pull, touch, pull. Okay. Over here, I'm going to add kind of like 2 slashes this way. So 1, 2. And then maybe a third one in the middle. I'm going to add just another 2 lines over here. I think speed is really the quality here. So I'm starting here and I'm telling myself I'm going to stop here. So I'm starting and I pull. I start and I pull. And how it shows up, I guess it's going to depend on how hard you're pressing and also, how you're pulling the brush. So up here, I'm just going to do two slashes. 1, 2. That's what I see on the start. 1, 2. Down here in this zone, right where around this branches, I see another one. I'm just going to do one of those. And you can see my tree just already starts to look a little bit more interesting. And we didn't have to shade any of the stuff in between because the lines are acting kind of like shadow marks. And everything's already correctly shaded in the middle of those marks. All right, so is there anybody who needs that explained again?
Nope, but thank you for asking.
Okay.
Looking good.
What color are those slashes again?
Okay, so it's that less intense brown color. So I went with red. I went with green, and then I added some yellow. I mixed it up, and I should get kind of like a less intense brown.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So there seems to be one right here by the Cardinals head on the painting that we're looking at. I'm just going to add another one up here because it looks like there's real estate for that. I'm going to add 3 marks over here. So I'm just looking at areas that are very open. What I don't want to do is be very rhythmic, meaning if I find an area that's open, I don't want to go directly to the middle, add 3 lines, right? I kind of want to be, you almost have to fight off your first instincts, right? You're like, okay, I'm going to put a mark here, hold it. Let's see if I could put it somewhere else that might be a little bit more random. So I'm going to come up here. I'm going to do 2 going straight across, and then maybe 1 underneath that's a little bit rounder, right? Maybe even add, looks like a smiley face now, all right? Looks like a Ninja Turtle. So I'm going to color it. Now it looks like a Ninja Turtle winking. Oh, man. Okay. But you get what I mean, right? I want you guys to experiment with quality of line, right? Try to fight the instinct to do things so rhythmically. So I started on the left side here. I'm going to come over to the right side, and I don't want to do 2 marks because there's one there. So I'm going to do 1 mark that comes across, and maybe another one here and there. Right, you just want to break up the field of those 3 colors. right? You want to add some visual interest to them.
Is it important to build now and kind of like bang this out? Or because you said when they dry, obviously they become plasticky. Does that cause a problem if you have to like set it down and come back to it? Should you plan ahead to do it all at once?
No, you can work on these as long as you like. If it dries up, if you're blending a certain area,
Mm-hmm.
you need to hammer out that area. It probably wouldn't be such a good idea to leave that area before it's fully blended.
Okay.
Meaning, if it dries up and it's not satisfactory, if you don't like it,
Mm-hmm.
you'll probably have to repaint that whole section. Not
Okay.
only it's close to impossible to mix the exact same color a week later, a month later. I forget all the time. That's a huge problem. But it's just really hard to control the amounts that you're mixing.
Right.
Yeah, is that basically what you're trying to discover?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
it's like you want to do it while it's fresh in your memory,
Okay.
but also mixing the right amount of paint is helpful, because if you run out, trying to get back to that same color is really, really hard.
Okay.
Like you would have to be so precise with, like, if you would have to use like maybe a palette knife and then measure out. There's people who weigh the amount of pigment that they use. So if you use 1 gram of white, 1 gram of red, 3 grams of green, right? Chances are you'll be able to mix that color again because you have a formula for it.
Okay.
Right? It's whatever formula you make it. But as far as eyeballing it, it's close to impossible.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I shouldn't say close to impossible. It is possible, but you'd have to dedicate a lot of time and effort to, acquiring that skill. Oh, there are some of those marks on the branches. It's just I have 3 here. So there's 1, 2, 3, right? And it just breaks up this field here. So if you look on this paint, it looks very plain. But here, boom, we have just a little bit of variety. So those look a little bit more geometric. So I'm not going to change the pigment. I'm just going to draw, 1 line here, 1 line here, close it in. I'm going to do the same thing here. Ran out of paint, reload. So, and then in between, just so like, here's what I'm talking about, rhythm. All right, so I have 2 pieces. Now my instinct is to go directly into the middle and put 1 in the middle. But I want to offset that a little bit. I want to come up here and maybe do something like that. All right. Maybe make this one a bit bigger. All right. Oh, we last detail would be the eyes. So right now we have these yellow-eyed cardinals. So if we were to take blue, just regular blue. Actually, I would start with white, because white is leading the charge here. Pick up white, drop just a little bit by that blue, and then take the tiniest amount of blue. All right. Come on, blue. All right, tiniest amount of blue. And I'm going to mix it into that white, and you should get a nice light blue. What you want it to do is offset the dark field that it's in, right? So actually the black that's around the eye will make that blue appear lighter than it is. So that kind of plays to our advantage. So if you want contrast, so again, I'm using my pinky and my other finger, my ring finger. They're both supporting my hand, and I'm flexing my fingers slowly, and I'm aiming for the eye. And I'm just applying the slightest amount of pressure with the tip of the brush. Okay. It's kind of hard to see on camera, but they are blue. To this other guy over here. All right, and we have a pretty good painting. Now we have pretty much, I would say about 80% of the painting from the picture that we're looking at. If you would like to, you've done a tremendous amount of painting on your own, or with me, I should say. You've done a lot of painting with me, but if you want to venture out on your own and try to add things like this lower branch with this bird here, or just look at the quality of the line work, like here, especially on this branch here, you could use a little bit more variety in the paint to give it that round feeling. We really just went like a two-toned kind of color, but you can see a lot of interplay of color here. Just make sure that it's in the vein of the colors that we mixed here, so they still remain harmonious. Like don't decide to grab another tube of paint and say, all right, I'm going to take a shortcut and I'm going to add this new color, and because I think it's going to get me closer to that color, because chances are once you do that, it's going to look so drastically different from everything else. You're going to want to feel like either painting everything else or, you know, covering that up and starting over again. Right, so there is a lot of information. I left out this bird on top. I thought that was maybe just too much, and definitely this bird in the back, definitely not needed. And in nature, I have never seen 5 cardinals chilling together, so I figured that's highly unrealistic. Either that or I just live in an area that doesn't have a lot of cardinals. I do have cardinals that visit my neighborhood. I love them. They're awesome. I'm so jealous of these countries with all these tropical birds. I think this is as tropical as it gets in the Northeast. We get these blue jays are the exception. I love blue jays too. So there is somewhat of a blank canvas here for you to play with. You could also play with these other areas. You can create tiny little branches. Just remember, since it's in the background, the branch here that would take up the space is connected to this tree. If you were to add that branch, don't make the outline as intense as this front branch. This branch in the foreground is meant to be the main attraction, right? The other thing we could do also is step up the intensity of this white. So you can see how it appears a little bit on the scratchy side. Like I could still see that gray. So if I was to take white, this is my medium brush. If I take white and I just add just another little touch of white paint, you can see how it steps up the intensity and the opacity a bit. So just to round out the quality of that branch.
And the black doesn't run into the white?
What do you mean?
It doesn't make the black bleed?
No, look, I just ran my finger over it. So all my branches that I did before are 100% dry.
Okay, so that's it.
Right, so my canvas is totally dry. If it is still tacky or still wet, just give it a couple of minutes, and then you can wait and you can just add some of that white paint. So the thing about acrylics is that they don't reactivate. So you can layer as much as you want. That paint is permanent. It ain't going nowhere.
Okay, good, because I ran out of white paint and I put in the black lines, but I need to go back for the white paint.
Yeah, you're 100% safe.
Okay, excellent.
Oh, I do have a caveat. Not all acrylic paints are created equal. So in their inception, they're meant to be layerable. You're meant to let them dry and put whatever paint you want on top without it reacting. However, there are some low-grade acrylic paints, right, that when you do layer them, they do react to each other. They do reactivate. So it really depends on the brand that you use. So the brand that I stick to are Liquitex. That's probably the best paints that I paint with, or the Blick acrylic paints. So the Blick, Dick Blick Art Supply, they actually create their own line of acrylic paints, and they have like a student brand or like a like an academic learning brand, which is kind of like mid-tier. You would, if you're looking for a really, really good acrylic paint, you would look for anything that says professional on it, and the price tag will be attached to that as well.
Right.
But I usually play with those two, and they work nicely with each other. So sometimes I'll use acrylic paints, both Blick and Liquitex together.
Okay.
So if you are buying your own paints, I know you were supplied with these paints, or some of you. And if they do react, that's I'm not sure which brand it is. I think they use the Blick brand, because to me they're the easiest to get. You order it, they ship it to your house, they work. Like I'm pretty sure I talked to Cherise. I'm almost positive those are the ones that she ordered.
Okay.
But yeah, so be careful when you're buying paints on your own, and you want to be a little bit more economical. Sometimes you're going to pay it for it on the other end.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
And I think that's it. So it's about that time. I hope you guys had fun. I thought this was a fun, cute painting. We learned a little bit more techniques. This is a little bit more graphical in nature, right? We're putting lines around things and not relying just on tones, lights and darks.
Okay.
This was awesome. Thank you so much.
Great.
And thank you,
Awesome.
Cherise.
Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Of course, guys. I'm happy you enjoyed it.
Yeah, great.
Just in time the sun came out.
Thank you.
Awesome.
It was amazing.
All right, great. I see in the chat people saying thank you, love the Cardinals, excellent. And I think the next paint meeting that we have set up is March 27th. So pretty much a month from today.
Yep.
I'll see you guys then.
Is that the same time? I apologize for interrupting.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, we like to stick to the 1 to 4. It seems like a pretty good sweet spot in the day.
Awesome. Thank you again. Happy Saturday to everybody.
Adios, everybody.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Find a spot on your wall for your painting.
Thank you.
Bye.
Better.